Welcome to a conversation about Nordic art. I am Jo Thorsheim, the owner of Norway Art, based in Minneapolis and now headquartered in Norway House. For a long time, I've been working to expand knowledge and interest in Nordic art across the country. Started the business in 1979 and continue to learn about this really fascinating subject. Max Stevenson is Norway House Director of Exhibits and Programs. He's filming this production. We're very grateful for his help. Both of us have Nordic background. Mine is from Rogaland and Hordaland in West Norway. His is from Voss, also West Norway, and Finland. Well, this art program was inspired by the annual Leif Eriksson Festival in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The festival is held each October around the American national observance of Leif Eriksson Day, a national holiday, federal holiday that honors Leif Eriksson, the Norse explorer who is traditionally recognized as the leader of the first Europeans to reach the North American continent. Leif Eriksson Day is an official American federal designation. Recently, there's been another observance, Indigenous Peoples Day is also celebrated. Observed in many cities and states across America. Not a federal holiday as yet, as far as I know. So I think that's an interesting development. Today we're going to look at selected paintings from the Nordic countries from Norway Art, from the collection at Norway Art, that represent the Nordic countries and the Sami homeland. We'll point out their special features. This is informal. I wish it could be interactive because I consider it to be a conversation and not a survey or a formal lecture or formal program, to just talk about the paintings a little bit. Follow up with any questions or comments you have by contacting me, if you would. Jo Thorsheim at Norway Art. So these selected paintings are by famous Nordic painters, not often displayed, but good representatives, I think, of the countries, the culture, and these particular painters. Also, I was thinking we could think of looking at a painting as if we're reading a book, studying it for the details, maybe scanning through it first. With a book, we might read the end of the story, the conclusion. We would look at a painting in sort of the same way to read art, to look at the details that reveal culture, history, costumes, the times, the landscape of the various countries. So, like reading a book, we might enjoy the writer's craftsmanship in a book, where in a painting we might admire the technique or the subject or the view, the perspective, various parts of the painting as we would in reading a book. So it's kind of fun, I think, to focus on this idea, sort of a theme or framework to find out about the story of a painting. A good example would be, and let me pause a few seconds at each painting so it isn't just zip, 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 and you have a chance to kind of absorb them and read the painting for the subject. Actually, there is a painting that has a very special connection to the Leif Eriksson Festival, based at Mindekirken, the Norwegian Lutheran Memorial Church in Minneapolis, which is celebrating its centennial actually next year, 2022. This famous painting is by Christian Krogh, a master painter of Norway. he entitled it Leif Eriksson Discovers America. The original is in the National Gallery, and we're showing a reproduction of it here, which has also a special connection to Mindekirken. Krogh painted it in 1893, signed down in the corner, and in the late 1980s, the founder of the Leif Eriksson Festival, Pastor John Mauritzen, visited Norway Art in my downtown Sexton Building gallery and spotted this particular artwork out of everything he saw there. And he exclaimed, I can see him now, I should have that painting. I'm the founder of the Leif Eriksson Festival, I'm buying that painting. And with his own check, he purchased the painting, and it's hung in Mindekirken ever since. So it has, I think, a very special connection to Pastor Mauritzen, the late Pastor Mauritzen, who was one of the pastors at Norwegian Church. And when you look at this painting, you want to consider the perspective, the costumes of the time, as Christian Krogh envisioned the costumes of the time, and the costume of Leif. I guess I'd never pictured Leif in a sort of yellow tunic before. It's a tremendous perspective showing the power of the waves, drawing your eye kind of in a triangular angle as Leif points. And over on the left horizon, you can see just a glimmer of land. Aha, there's land. And for anyone who has sailed to Norway or to Europe, that is a thrill. I remember 10 days on Stavanger, and I didn't realize we wouldn't even see anything, like even a bird, for that long. So seeing Scotland was a real thrill as we traveled up to Norway. So this original painting from which the reproduction was done, made in Norway, imported by me. The original is in the National Gallery of Norway in Oslo. And Krogh has pieces hung in museums in very many places and private collections in Denmark and Norway particularly. In 1879, he visited Denmark, the artist colony in Skagen, and he was influenced there by other painters, and he in turn influenced Danish painters such as the Ankers, Anna and Michael Anker, famous Danish painters. So I think this painting also shows the interaction of and the flow between the Scandinavian countries with travel back and forth, study back and forth, exchange of ideas, circles of friends across all of the countries. So in this we see the tension of the rope as another visual piece that brings our eye through the painting. So actually Krogh was a leading figure in a transition from Romanticism to Naturalism. And he even took realism further because he did a lot of social realism, depiction of downtrodden people, and felt very strongly as a champion of justice and freedom of expression way back then. He was born in Norway in 1852 and died in Oslo in 1825. He went to law school and decided not to be a lawyer. He went to Germany, which is another example of flow across the European countries. Went to the Art Academy in Karlsruhe and went to Munich. And we know the German-Norwegian connections in art, as well as business and other culture and language, were very close. He returned to Skagen in the north of Denmark several times and became really familiar with the very well-known artist colony that developed at Skagen in the north of Denmark. here we also have another painting that maybe credits Krogh, or rather Leif Eriksson and Krogh, a little bit in being a leader of immigration, because he's portraying Leif Eriksson in the year 1000, and we know the flow of immigrants was huge after that from Scandinavia. It's a little bit of a stretch, but we could think of him as being the first immigrant, I think. Along the line of immigration and also connection between the Scandinavian countries, behind me is a very important painting. It's called Steaming, I named it, Steaming Toward America. It was painted in 1899 by the famous Danish painter who immigrated to America, to New York, Antonio Jacobsen. He was born 1850, 1921, and it's a very special painting of a very special steamship. The SS steamship Hecla pours on the steam as it pushes across the Atlantic to America in 1899. 122 years ago, and the painting really stirs the hearts of descendants of Scandinavian American immigrants, because this particular ship, a real ship, made 6-day trips per year between Norway and New York, between the months of February and November. And actually, 1899 in my family, Thorsheim family, is big because Grandpa Rasmus Thorsheim arrived in 1899 on a different ship, on a ship that came from Liverpool, where this ship, the Hecla, actually sailed from Kristiansand and Oslo. The name Hecla gives credit to Iceland, and we want to touch on Iceland. I don't happen to have a painting representing Iceland today, but as I'm sure you all know, Hecla is the name of a very famous volcano in Iceland, and honored through Hecla clubs and various organizations named for it, observing, celebrating that history. So here's the ship Hecla in 1899 coming to America. Odd Lovell, the Scandinavian scholar, actually has published an article in a journal in 1993, I think, about the Danish-American line that owned the Hecla ship. And you may want to look into the history of the ship itself. It's fascinating. Before I knew about Odd's article, I'd really been curious about the ship itself. There's a lot of information online about it. It's very special for one of Antonio Jacobsen's paintings. He was prolific. He immigrated to New York, as I said, but this one crosses really all Scandinavian countries, because it's a Danish-owned ship. The Thingvalla line was bought or merged with Scandinavian American lines based in Copenhagen. So it has a strong Danish connection, and you can see the Danish flag ensign at the back of the ship. And also you can see the Thingvalla ensign in the center and the American flag in the front, and it really cuts across all Scandinavia. The passengers were largely Norwegian and Swedish, but there were Danes as well. And I imagine people traveled up to Oslo or Kristiansand from Denmark, we'll say, or over from Sweden, because this was a fast ship. Grandpa's took 10, 11, 12 days. I sailed for 10 days on Stavangerfjord. It had mechanical problems, but normally it was a long trip anyway. But the Hecla made it in 6 or 8 days. So it's quite amazing. There are interior shots available of the ship that show a lovely wood-paneled, lobby and open stairway and so on. But one can imagine in cabin class or tourist class, immigrants were probably crowded together, traveling as we see in historic photos of travel. I wanted to linger a little bit on Jakobsen because I think the story of how he was discovered is very, very interesting. He had an office job in Manhattan, and at the end of his workday, he would go down to the Battery, you know, the southern tip of Manhattan where the Hudson River is, and the great harbor where the great ships came in, still do, and he would sketch ships. He loved to sketch, draw. He'd had some art training in Denmark, and people began to observe this young fellow sketching. And at the time, banks in America hired artists to paint original paintings on the door of the big safe or vault in each bank. That was a custom. That was new to me. I think the Northfield Bank that Minnesota that Jesse James robbed, I'm told that that bank vault they think had a painting on it as well. So bankers, probably Wall Street, can imagine, would see this young fellow sketching and began to commission him to paint bank vaults, and a particular company that manufactured them also engaged him to do the same. From that, shipping lines thought, we need portraits of our ships. And so he started painting portraits of ships. He did so well, he established his own studio in Hoboken, New Jersey, and he was proud of that. And on the painting we were looking at just now, I'll highlight it with red. It says, can you see it? Hoboken, New Jersey, and the address. So if you want more, you know where to get them from Jakobsen. It's a very valuable painting, and I think really very interesting, especially the fact that it crosses over all the Nordic boundaries so well. So let us look at where the immigrants came from. Where did these people come from? What kind of environments did they live in before they immigrated? We can get clues to this by looking at the paintings. And behind me, the huge ocean scene you see is a Swedish painting by the Swedish painter William Gislander, born in Blekinge and died in Vestlanda. He was an impressionist and modern painter. We see the rolling waves and can imagine the immigrants sailing, say, on the Hekla on probably a smoother day. They probably had rougher seas than we see here. But sailing on such a sea voyage as the view from the painting. Now Gislander shows the beach area at Skagen. So here we have that inter-Scandinavian connection again with Gislander the Swede going to Skagen, to the artist colony in North Denmark, being part of that colony and painting there. Gislander was well known for seascapes, wildlife. He painted ducks, geese, shorebirds, gulls, and always in a beautiful landscape. Now, in the one we're looking at, I don't see any birds. There might be one in the sky. What I do see are footprints in the sand of the beach, which I think is kind of an interesting point to think about. And then the Sami. Sami people came to America later than most of the other groups, as far as I know. What I do know is that in my study of Scandinavian art, we know about woodcuts, wonderful woodcuts of Sami L.E.I.F, herding reindeer by Savio and others. But I actually have never seen an oil painting of Sami L.E.I.F. And this one is called Sami Encampment, 1934, painted by a Scottish artist who was intrigued by Scandinavia, traveled there, painted a lot in Norway, and captured this Sami family or couple in their encampment. We see their home, the fire outside is going probably to cook the dinner. The gentleman kneeling, I'm not sure if he's cleaning fish or cleaning hides. It looks as if the boat that's beached there is piled with something, like maybe reindeer meat or hide. When you have a chance to see a video later and do close-ups, you'll probably be able to identify what he was really doing. I love the activity, the idea that it shows a Norwegian scene in the background representing the Sami life, the nomadic life of following the reindeer herds. We know today Sami life is very modernized, and there are reindeer meat manufacturing establishments in Kautokeino and so on. But this is a picture of life in the 30s. The artist was Mark Osmond Curtis, C-U-R-T-I-S. He used a pseudonym when he painted in Scandinavia. It's more Scandinavian, Bjardam, H, first the initial H, and then B-J-A-R-D-A-M. And this painting is signed with the Bjardam pseudonym. And as I say, we don't know why he did, but many artists did that. Some had many pseudonyms, or used another name for painting interiors than they used for landscapes or something like that. But here we see Sami dress, we see the lavu, we see the smoke rising from the fire. It's really quite a fascinating piece, I think. And then in Finland, to represent Finland, I brought a painting from an area called Porkkala. I asked Max how to pronounce that. And this peaceful scene of a beautiful rocky shore and rolling waves breaking over rocks in the water with an old sail ship in the distance is deceiving in a way with the deeper meaning that it has. It's a very nice landscape, very beautifully done by the Finnish artist Väinö Tim, T-I-M-M. He was a well-known artist, lived in Denmark some, lived in Finland, of course, painted some paintings that were purchased by Herbert Hoover, and on the back of the painting, there's a very interesting inscription signed by the painter to his friend with the location of the painting at Porkkala. Now, the deceiving part, not meant to deceive the viewer, but the deeper meaning, this particular peninsula has a great meaning in history in Finland, and also in industry, commercial fishing industry. And if you look online, you will find very interesting information about the Second World War, connections with Russia, armistice with the Soviet Union, Least Porkkala. It was a strategic military base. Many meanings that I wouldn't know, just enjoying the wonderful painting. And then we know the Norwegians came from Hardanger. I'd like to really focus a little bit on the scene you see there in the gold frame. Hans Dahl was a very popular Norwegian painter. He lived a long life, 1849 to 1937. He painted mostly in West Norway. He painted also on trips to Germany, but he painted scenes from Norway that he sketched when he spent summers back home in Balestrand, the Sognefjord area, Hardanger Fjord. This one is entitled Arriving for a Celebration. And we can imagine it's a wedding. Hans Dahl often pictured the dairymaid holding the bucket in a bunad in a mountain scene. This is unusual in that it shows so many figures, all bunad or clad in their costumes, dress, with so much action, all ages. There's an old lady being helped ashore. I can say old lady because I'm here myself, helping this old lady to shore, and somebody else helping the younger woman balance as they pull the older lady up. We see the men the boat to the left of center, the man in the back looks quite a bit older. He's sort of bent over. Young women with their hair blowing. It's a wonderful scene of life in Hardanger, and very, very typical of the work of Hans Stahl, and yet unusual, remarkable for Hans Stahl in the terms of the figures. The water is very well done, the brush strokes, it's very realistic, it's from that period. So it shows where the people immigrating from Hardanger, for example, traveling to catch the ship we see behind me, the Hekla, to come to America, would have come from there. So I think that's a very interesting one too. Then in Denmark, one of the most, really an old master of Danish painting was Lauritz Ring, R-I-N-G. And an example of his work is a beautiful interior. We see a lot of wonderful paintings from Denmark with landscapes and Skagen, the sea, farm life, agriculture. Wonderful interiors by painters like Hammershøi, who painted in all neutral colors, really grays, beiges, a lot of angles. But in this one, we see the life at that time. And it's a very special scene in that the title is, "How Are You Doing, Old Friend?" And in studying, trying to read the story of this painting, I talked to one of our local Minneapolis doctors who's very interested in art and showed her this painting. And she said, "I think that's a doctor visiting a patient." And that hadn't occurred to me. But reading more into it, the painter's father actually died just about a year before he painted this painting. And to me, the profile looks a little bit like the artist's profile. I've been in contact with the National Museum and National Library of Denmark about the painting to see what their opinions are. It's signed and dated on the front board of the chair on the left, and paintings are on the wall. And it seems to signify a very wealthy home. So Lauritz Ring was able to capture, I believe too, the visit of a physician who, interestingly enough, is smoking at the bedside. If you look closely, you'll see that he has one of the very popular and common types of pipes used at the time with a long stem. And he's holding the bowl in one hand. And it appears to be a meerschaum, which was very popular, very expensive at that time. Someone else, I mentioned the woman who tipped me off thinking it's probably a doctor's visit. Someone else viewing it pointed out that at the time, one of the common medications was laudanum. That's close. And that was dosed from a cup and bottle, and that the timing was very important, needed to be supervised. Well, if we read the details here, we see the patient almost saying, "How long till the next dose, doctor?" And the visitor watching a small clock up on a stand, and a bottle and a cup with a spoon in it. And a small detail is that I purchased a set of 4 inexpensive settings of everyday stuff for my home. And like this design, 4 cups in different colors. And I was startled one day to think, this cup is almost pulling out a detail from Ring's painting from 1893. So kind of interesting to look at that. A reason we could believe that it's a wealthy home is that I learned that at that time in Denmark, wealthy people were treated at home rather than in the hospital. And poorer people with less means went to the hospital. So if you could afford it, your doctor came to you. A house visit, house call. Very, very interesting. And I imagine that happened perhaps all over Scandinavia and all over Europe. I don't know if that was a common practice. So I really think that it's possible that that was the story here. I think the human interaction that's portrayed, the connection between the patient and doctor, showing the compassion and the closeness, the artist has brought them close together, is quite remarkable. And Rimg really pioneered symbolism and social realism in Danish art. So while he documented this poignant 1893 scene at the bedside of the elderly man, he maybe was making some kind of statements that are unknown to us today. The first owner, the provenance of the paintings, very interesting, was possibly, was for sure a doctor, a medical doctor in Copenhagen. Ortman was his name. His name is on the back. The next owner was a J.H. Melchior, an important merchant and art collector in Copenhagen. And I purchased it from Denmark for resale. It was in a private collection when I purchased it. So it has, I think, quite an interesting provenance. The next one, Nordstrom, the last one we'll focus on today, and this has really been fun for me, I hope you've enjoyed it too, is by very famous Swedish painter Nordstrom, Karl, K-A-R-L, Nordstrom, with the umlaut above the O. And interestingly enough, he and Christian Krogh, who painted the Leif Eriksson we started with, were friends. And Krogh painted a very famous, sort of a portrait, but also an interior of Karl Nordstrom, which sold in New York last year at a huge price. Karl Nordstrom's looking out a window, he has a black hat, and here's a corner of a room. Now this room is an actual address in Stockholm, Norrtullsgatan in Stockholm. And you can find the building on Street View, Google Street View. There are several interesting things about it. By stepping through the doors as we are, this wonderful perspective that Nordstrom was able to gain, we're taken into a typical flat, as they called apartments, of Stockholm at that time, 1914. And take note or look at the details. A woman from Sweden, a Scandinavian specialist, saw the painting, or a photo of the painting, and she said, you know, the first thing I noticed was the hardware on the doors. She said, how Scandinavian. They never used doorknobs. They used a kind of a door handle that turns. And then also, maybe the most interesting thing about it is, it's believed to be a home of Strindberg, August Strindberg, who was to Sweden, maybe what Ibsen would have been to Norway and so on. So it's likely that it was an August Strindberg apartment. It was known that he moved to several places in Stockholm. And Strindberg's last residence was right next to this building on Drottningsgatan 85. And so we're thinking that very likely Nordstrom depicted August Strindberg, the famous dramatist and writer, one of his apartments. August Strindberg and Nordstrom were very good friends, along with Richard Berg. They studied art together and were contemporaries. Nordstrom lived 1855, 1923. Also, Karl Nordstrom was a leader of a group of young artists who were really instigating a revolution against previous art training. They felt it was too rigid, too realistic. And so the 1914 painting of the flat in Norrtullsgatan takes us to a different style of painting, more impressionistic. The colors, the composition, the brush strokes. If you look at it carefully, the brush strokes are fantastic. And then the details, when we see photos from the Strindberg Museum in Stockholm, which is an actual place where he lived, with some original furniture. I haven't been there, but I understand it has some original pieces and then some reproductions. But if you look at the photos, there's a similar lamp, there's a similar chair to the one you see on the right, just a part of a chair. And also the table. The simple design of the table is very like one shown in photos of the museum. Further research is needed to confirm that actually was a Strindberg residence, but it's very likely that it was. Well, I really enjoyed this tour with you, and be sure to get in touch with any comments or questions you have. Thanks to Max, thanks to the Leif Eriksson Festival for really inspiring this short, informal kind of survey of some selected representatives of Nordic art. Thanks so much.